Hi, this is Ms. Licon, and today we're going to do lesson 1.2c and 1.2d, combining decimal terms. So first, there's a few things we're going to need to go over for decimal terms. So for example, when you're adding, we are going to need to line up the decimals. So if I'm adding 3 5/10 plus 1 25/100, when I do my addition, I'm going to have to make sure to line my decimals up, place any zeros that I need to, and then add. Also for subtracting, I'm also going to line up my decimals, but there's one extra thing. I have to make sure when I subtract that I always place my larger number on top. So when I subtract 12 53/100 minus 1 1/10, I'm going to line it up with the larger number on top, place any extra zeros, and then complete my subtraction. So there's also a few rules we're going to go over for terms. So our rules for terms, I have a -7 and a +4. So that means I have 7 negatives and 4 positives. If I were to draw this out, I would have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 negatives, 1, 2, 3, 4 positives. I can make a zero pair with a positive and a negative. So all my zeros will cancel out and I'll be left with 3 negatives. So when combining terms, when we have different signs, we're going to subtract. 7 subtract 4 is 3, and we're going to take the sign with more. Since I have more negatives, I have an answer of -3. So again, 7 subtract 4 is 3, but since I have more negatives, I have an answer of -3. Okay, one more thing. -7 subtract 4, if I do a term chart, I have 7 negatives and 4 more negatives. So if I were to draw this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 negatives, 4 more negatives, so I actually have a total of 11 negatives. When the signs are the same, we are going to add 7 plus 4 is 11, and we're going to keep the sign. Since they're all negative, I have a negatives and more negatives, I'm going to have a -11 for our final answer. Okay, so now we're going to try the same thing but with decimals. So my first example is we are going to simplify -5 and 23/100, subtract 2 and 35/100. So we're going to do a term chart and keep track of the sign of our numbers. So I have a -5 and 23/100 and a -2 and 35/100. Since the signs are the same, I'm going to add these numbers together. 3 plus 5 is 8, 2 plus 3 is 5, 5 plus 2 is 7, and since they're both negative, they're the same sign, I'm going to keep the sign and say that I have a total of -7 and 58/100. My decimals are lined up, my addition is okay. If I check this, this is as if I lost $5.23 and then I lost an additional $2.35. I have lost a total of $7.58. Okay, so for example 2, we're going to start off with a positive number and subtract a negative number. So if I have 6 and 25/100, subtract 12 and 64/100, I'm going to complete my term chart. I have 6 and 25/100, which is positive, and I have a -12 and 64/100. Since the signs are different, I'm going to subtract, but when I subtract, I have to make sure I put the number with the larger value on top. 12.64, subtract 6 and 25/100. I'm going to have to borrow. For subtract 5, I couldn't do it, so I have to borrow from the 6, make it a 5. That 4 now becomes a 14. 14 subtract 5 is 9. 5 subtract 2 is 3. Right now I can actually do 12 subtract 6, which is 6. But most likely kids are probably going to borrow from the 1, make it a 0, make the 2 a 12. 12 subtract 6 is 6. My decimals are lined up. Now I just have to make sure I take the sign of the number with more. So I have 6 positives, 12 negatives. This number, there's more negatives, so my answer is going to be a -6 and 39/100. So I can think of this as I had $6.25, but I owe someone $12.64. Once I pay them, I'm still going to owe them an additional $6.39. Okay, so for example 3, it's going to look similar to the first one, except for I have to be really careful when I do my combining. So I'm still going to do a term chart. I have a negative 34 5/10 and a negative 12 1/100. So when I put them in my chart, I lined up my decimals already, so I'm okay with that. They're the same sign, so I'm going to add them together. On this one, I have to put an additional 0 before I complete my addition. 0 plus 1 is 1. 5 plus 0 is 5. 4 plus 2 is 6. 3 plus 1 is 4. My decimal comes straight down. Since they're all negative, my answer will be negative. So I have negative 46 51/100. Okay, we're going to do 2 more, and these questions are going to start to get a little longer, but it's the same basic concept. So our next question is negative 3 1/10, subtract 5 28/100, plus 6 7/10, minus 12 5/10. So now I'm going to have 4 terms inside of my chart, and then I'm going to combine them the way we did with the others. So I have a negative 3 1/10. I have a negative 5 28/100. I have a positive 6 7/10, and I have a negative 12 5/100. So since these are all the same sign, I'm going to have to add them together. The only thing I don't like is that my decimals aren't lined up, so I'm actually going to do my addition with my decimals lined up. Okay, so now my decimals are all lined up. I'm going to add all these numbers together to find out how many negatives I have. So I have 8, 5 plus 2 is 7, 7 plus 1 is 8, 5 plus 3 is 8, 8 plus 2 is 10. So I have 20.88, 20 88/100, and they're all negative. And I have 6 7/100, which is positive. Now I have 2 numbers I'm combining with different signs, so now I'm actually going to take these 2 numbers and subtract them with the larger number on top. 20 88/100, subtract 6 7/10, borrow, and I'm left with 14 18/100. Now I just have to see if there are more positives or negatives. I have 6.7 positives, 20.88 negatives. I have more negatives, so my answer will be a negative. Okay, we're going to do one last question, and then I'm going to have some for you to try. So our last question is negative 1 15/100 plus 2 3/10 plus 7 1/10 minus 5 5/100. So we're going to do a term chart, keep track of our signs. So I have a negative 1 15/100. I have a positive 2 3/10, positive 7 1/10, and a negative 5 5/100. So my decimals are lined up. I'm going to combine. I'm going to add together all my negatives to see how many negatives I have. 5 plus 5 is 10. 1 plus 1 is 2. 5 plus 1 is 6. So I have 6 20/100 all negative. Now I'm going to combine all the positives to see how many I have. I'm going to add these together as well. 3 plus 1 is 4. 2 plus 7 is 9. So I have 9.4 or 9 4/10 that are all positive. Now I have to combine these 2 numbers. They have different signs, so I'm going to subtract them. This number is larger than this, so I'm going to subtract with this number on top. 9.4, subtract 6.20. I could actually leave the 0 off. Subtract, and I have a 0, 2, 3. So I have 3 2/10, or if I wanted to put the 0, 3 20/100. I have more positives, so I have a positive 3 2/10. Okay, so now I have some questions for you to try. Once you try them, you can read the text box below, scroll down, and check your answer. So here are the questions I would like you to try. So number 1, negative 3 and 8 tenths, subtract 2 and 6 tenths. Number 2, negative 23 and 11 hundredths plus 30 and 7 tenths. Number 3, negative 6 and 25 hundredths, subtract 12 and 64 hundredths. Number 4, negative 3 and 1 tenth plus 4 and 5 tenths. Subtract 6 and 1 tenth plus 2 and 2 tenths.